The rain had been falling for hours, drumming a relentless rhythm against the narrow alleyways of Seoul. Laila crouched behind a stack of crates, her breaths shallow, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She had been running for what felt like an eternity, each step driving her deeper into the labyrinthine backstreets of the city. Someone was after her. She was sure of it. The footsteps, the faint rustle of movement behind her, the shadow that seemed to flit just at the edge of her vision. They were all too deliberate to be random. Her mind raced as she calculated her options. Escape seemed impossible, yet surrender was unthinkable. She was not going to be caught. Not again. Her past mistakes had taught her the hard way that once someone had control over you, it was almost impossible to regain freedom. Her fingers clenched into fists as she pressed herself against the cold metal of the crates, listening, waiting. The sudden sound of a low voice froze her in place. "Laila?" The syllable was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried an authority that made her body stiffen. She turned slowly, eyes wide, and saw a figure step out from the shadows. He was tall, impeccably dressed despite the rain, his dark hair plastered slightly to his forehead. His gaze was sharp, calculating, and yet there was something softer lurking beneath it. "You," she began, uncertainty lacing her tone. "I'm here to keep you alive," he said, stepping closer. "You shouldn't be running. Not from me." Laila's heart hammered. The man in front of her was none other than Jinwoo Kang, heir to one of the most powerful families in Korea, a man whose reputation for cold precision and unyielding control preceded him. The city whispered about his influence, his reach, and the lethal efficiency with which he managed threats. And yet, here he was, telling her that he was on her side. "I don't understand," she said, backing up slightly, rain dripping off her hair. "Why would you care?" Jinwoo's gaze softened imperceptibly. "Because," he said, voice low and deliberate, "you are not like the others. You think too fast, move too carefully. You're valuable, to me, and to yourself. Now come, we don't have time for questions." Despite every instinct screaming at her to run, Laila found herself following him. There was a magnetic authority in the way he moved, an unspoken command in the tilt of his shoulders, the set of his jaw. She realized, with a mix of awe and apprehension, that trusting him might be the only way to survive the night. As they moved through the slick streets, Jinwoo led her to a sleek black car waiting under the dim light of a lamppost. He opened the door for her, his fingers brushing her hand for just a moment, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Seatbelt," he instructed quietly. "We have company, and we need to be quick." Laila obeyed, her hands trembling slightly as she buckled herself in. As Jinwoo slid into the driver's seat, she caught sight of the streets behind them. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, figures that seemed to vanish when she looked directly at them. The danger was real. Her gut screamed that whoever had been hunting her tonight wasn't just some petty thug. This was organized, calculated, and deadly. "I need to know everything," Jinwoo said without taking his eyes off the road. "Who's after you? Why? And what are you carrying that they want?" Laila hesitated, then realized she had no choice. She had been alone for too long, and the weight of the truth pressed down on her chest. "It's complicated," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to get involved. It just happened." Jinwoo's hands tightened on the wheel slightly, a sign of controlled tension. "Complicated is fine, secrets are fine, but now the priority is survival. Tell me what you know, Laila, and don't leave anything out." She began recounting everything. The people she had crossed, the wrong place at the wrong time, the dangerous mix of information and people that had suddenly painted a target on her back. Jinwoo listened, absorbing every word, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable. but she could feel it in the way he reacted, the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful movements of his hands. He was already forming a plan. "Good," he said finally, after she had finished. "You're honest. That makes you easier to protect. And believe me, I will protect you, even if it means stepping into places you'd never imagine." His tone carried both promise and warning, a duality that made Laila's stomach knot with apprehension and curiosity. The car weaved through the streets with precision, Jinwoo's hands steady, his focus absolute. "We'll get somewhere safe," he said after a few minutes. "Somewhere you can rest, plan, and survive. But this isn't just about tonight, Laila. If we're going to make it through the days ahead, you need to understand. I don't save people lightly, and when I choose to, it's because they're important." Laila's breath caught. Important. The word resonated, touching a part of her she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. The desperate desire to matter, to be seen as more than expendable. And in that moment, with Jinwoo's unwavering gaze on the road ahead, she felt something shift. Perhaps she wasn't just running anymore. Perhaps she had been chosen. Hours later, they arrived at a secluded villa perched on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by dense trees and guarded with the precision of military efficiency. As they entered, Laila noticed the subtle signs of a world she had never known: the discreet cameras, the silent guards, the layout that prioritized both comfort and security. She realized with a sinking thrill that she had stepped into Jinwoo's domain completely, a place where power and control were absolute. "You'll be safe here," Jinwoo said, finally removing his coat and handing it to her. "But safe doesn't mean idle. There's work to do, alliances to understand, and threats to identify. You survived tonight, Laila, but survival is only the beginning." Laila swallowed hard, the weight of her new reality pressing on her. She was no longer just a hunted girl in the rain-soaked streets. She was now in the orbit of a man who wielded power like a weapon, whose influence reached into places she couldn't yet imagine. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of exhilaration ignited, a dangerous, thrilling acknowledgement that her life had changed forever. As she settled into the room prepared for her, Jinwoo paused at the doorway. "Rest if you can," he said softly. "Tomorrow, the real journey begins." Laila watched him leave, the door clicking softly behind him. Alone, she let herself breathe for a moment, allowing the adrenaline to ebb. But even in the quiet, her mind was alive, racing with possibilities, strategies, and the haunting knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. She was hunted no longer. She was chosen, observed, and challenged. And somewhere deep inside, she welcomed it. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening, dangerous, and alive. Inside, Laila's pulse matched the rhythm of the city, quickened by fear, thrill, and the knowledge that her life had entered a new, perilous chapter. And as she lay awake that night, she understood one unshakable truth. Survival was no longer just about escaping. It was about learning to navigate power, influence, and the dangerous orbit of the man who had saved her. Morning came slowly, pale sunlight filtering through the blinds of the secluded villa. Laila woke with a mix of tension and anticipation, the events of the previous night still vivid in her mind. Jinwoo's presence lingered like a shadow, even in the quiet of her room. Her muscles ached from running, from fear, from adrenaline, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had survived, yes, but survival was only the first lesson in a new, complex curriculum that Jinwoo had thrust her into. The sound of soft footsteps drew her attention. She turned to see Minseo, Jinwoo's younger cousin, entering the room with a tray of food. Minseo was in his early 20s, his features delicate but alert, the keen intelligence in his eyes offsetting his otherwise gentle demeanor. "Breakfast," he said quietly, setting the tray down on the small table. "You need strength for today," Jinwoo insisted. Laila studied him cautiously. There was something different about Minseo. He was loyal, yes, but there was also an independence in the way he moved, a subtle edge beneath the polite, almost deferential exterior. She nodded silently, accepting the tray, her thoughts racing. "You'll want to eat," Minseo said softly, as if reading her hesitation. "Strength isn't just physical, it's mental. Jinwoo believes in preparation. He believes in observation." The mention of Jinwoo caused a small shiver to run through her. She had been aware of his expectations from the moment he had taken her into his care, but seeing how those expectations extended to his inner circle made her realize just how structured and controlled his world was. As Laila ate, Minseo moved to a small desk in the corner, quietly reviewing documents. His focus was precise, meticulous. She realized that the villa was not just a safe house, it was a hub of activity, a place where every action was measured, every word weighed, and every presence accounted for. Before she could digest the full weight of her surroundings, another figure appeared in the doorway. Heir, Jinwoo's chief strategist, stood tall, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to read not just the room, but the people within it. He nodded at Laila briefly. "You've met Jinwoo. Minseo is useful. I'm Heir. Consider me your guide for understanding the dynamics you're now part of." Laila's chest tightened. The sudden introduction of yet another figure of authority reminded her that her new life was not only about surviving, but also about understanding the subtle currents of power that surrounded her. She nodded, words failing her, but her mind was already racing with questions. Who were these people really? How much could she trust them? And most importantly, what was expected of her now that she was within Jinwoo's orbit? Jinwoo appeared shortly after, his presence calm yet commanding. He surveyed the room briefly, then his eyes settled on Laila. "Today," he said, voice low and deliberate, "you learn more than survival. You learn strategy, observation, and influence. Minseo and Heir will assist you. Pay attention." He moved closer, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. "Do you understand why you are here, Laila?" he asked, his gaze intense. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering of her heart. "To survive. To learn." Jinwoo nodded slightly as if satisfied but not entirely pleased. "Not just survival," he corrected. "To understand power, to influence outcomes, to see the unseen. Tonight you were protected. Today you begin learning why, because protection without understanding is temporary." Laila followed him as he led her through the villa, past corridors lined with cameras and silent guards. Each step reinforced a subtle truth. She was no longer a random participant in a chaotic world. She had entered a carefully orchestrated environment where every action mattered and every observation could shift the balance of power. Minseo and Heir guided her into a room filled with screens, maps, and detailed reports. "This is the command center," Heir explained. "We monitor threats, alliances, and operations. You've survived the streets, Laila, but now you must survive strategy." Laila's eyes widened as she took in the information. The screens displayed movement patterns, names, photos, and potential threats. Maps highlighted zones of influence, routes, and blind spots. She realized with a jolt that Jinwoo's world was far larger and more complex than she had imagined. "Your task today," Jinwoo said, standing beside her, "is observation. You will learn to spot anomalies, predict outcomes, and understand intentions. Minseo and Heir will guide you, but the responsibility rests with you. Mistakes have consequences." Laila's pulse quickened. She had already faced death once, but this was different. This was a test of intellect, intuition, and psychological acuity. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." The morning passed in a blur of instructions, demonstrations, and exercises designed to sharpen her mind. Minseo walked her through patterns of movement and surveillance, teaching her to anticipate not just actions, but reactions. Hyejin introduced her to potential threats and contingencies, showing her how to weigh risk against opportunity. Jinwoo observed silently, his gaze never leaving her, assessing her comprehension and instinctual responses. By midday, she felt her head spin from the flood of information, but she also felt a strange exhilaration. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't merely reacting to danger, she was beginning to anticipate it, to manipulate outcomes subtly, to see patterns others might miss. During a break, Minseo leaned against the edge of the table, glancing at her with a faint smile. "You're not just surviving," he said quietly. "You're learning fast. But remember, speed without comprehension can be dangerous. Jinwoo's world rewards precision over haste." Laila nodded, grateful for the insight. "I'll be careful," she replied. Heijin, who had been reviewing a screen nearby, looked up sharply. "Careful isn't enough. You must be aware. Every detail matters, and some details are deadly." Laila absorbed the warning, her senses sharpening. She realized that she was stepping into a game far larger and more intricate than simple survival. The streets had tested her body. Jinwoo's world would test her mind and instincts. As evening approached, Jinwoo gathered them in a briefing room. Screens lit the dim room with data, photos, and strategic overlays. "A rival faction has been making moves," he explained. "They are testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. Tonight we respond. Laila, your role is observation and reporting. Minseo and Heijin will assist, but you must act independently when necessary." Her chest tightened. Independent. She had always worked alone, relying solely on herself. Now she was part of a team, yet her choices could carry consequences far beyond her control. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of surveillance, coordination, and rapid assessment. Laila moved through the command center, processing information, noting inconsistencies, and making predictions. Her instincts, honed on the streets, merged with the structured teachings of Minseo and Heijin. She found herself anticipating moves before they occurred, issuing subtle instructions that redirected guards, adjusted patrols, and stabilized situations. Jinwoo observed from the shadows, his eyes dark and calculating. Yet there was a faint glimmer of acknowledgement when her predictions proved accurate. She felt a rush of pride mixed with a lingering fear. This world was unforgiving, and yet she was beginning to master its rhythms. By nightfall, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Laila's body ached from the intensity, but her mind felt sharper than ever. She had survived the streets, she had survived the chase, and now she had survived the complexities of Jinwoo's world. Jinwoo approached her quietly, his expression calm, but eyes dark with assessment. "You performed well," he said softly. "Better than I expected for your first formal test. But this is only the beginning. Your evolution has just started." Laila swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. Evolution. She realized that she was no longer merely a survivor. She was becoming something more, a participant, an influencer, someone who could navigate the dangerous currents of Jinwoo's world with precision and awareness. Minseo and Heijin exchanged brief glances, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Laila noted the subtle tension. These were not merely assistants, they were strategists, guardians, and perhaps challengers. She would need to understand them, anticipate them, and integrate their strengths into her own growing capability. As she settled into a chair later that night, the villa quiet. Except for the distant hum of the city, Laila allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had entered this world as a hunted girl, terrified and alone. Now she was a student of strategy, a participant in power, a presence that mattered, and somewhere deep inside, a spark of exhilaration ignited, a dangerous, thrilling acknowledgement that her life had changed forever and that survival was no longer the goal. Mastery was. The next morning, Laila woke to the quiet hum of the villa, her body still sore from the intensity of the previous night. The command center had become a living, breathing organism in her mind. She could already picture the screens, the maps, the patterns of movement and influence. But the day ahead promised new lessons, and Jinwoo had a way of making sure every day was a test, whether she realized it immediately or not. As she moved down the hall, she encountered a new figure in the lounge, Seo-yeon, Jinwoo's childhood friend and unofficial liaison to the family's extended network. Seo-yeon was striking, with sharp cheekbones, long black hair pulled into a practical ponytail, and eyes that seemed to pierce straight through pretense. Unlike Min Seo's quiet intelligence or Haejin's cold precision, Seo-yeon exuded confidence and charm, a natural presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "You must be Laila," Seo-yeon said smoothly, extending a hand. Her smile was polite, but assessing. "I've heard a lot about you, most of it accurate, thankfully." Laila shook her hand cautiously, noting the warmth beneath the surface. "And you are?" she asked. "Seo-yeon," she replied with a faint bow of her head. "Jinwoo trusts me to watch the bigger picture, make sure the pieces fit. Consider me a guide or a test, depending on how you perform." Laila's pulse quickened. The villa already felt like a complex chessboard. Now another player had entered the game. She nodded carefully, feeling the subtle thrill of challenge. "I understand," she said. Jinwoo appeared from the shadows as if materializing out of the walls themselves. His presence was magnetic, suffocating and intoxicating all at once. "Today," he said, voice low and deliberate, "you will observe, predict, and influence. Seo-yeon will assist you in understanding the broader network. Min Seo and Haejin will continue with operational support. Fail to grasp the connections, and you will fail the lesson." Laila swallowed hard. Fail. The word carried a sharp edge in Jinwoo's world. Failure could mean compromise, danger, even death. But the thrill of understanding, of proving herself, coursed through her veins. She nodded. "I'm ready." The group moved to the command center where multiple screens displayed maps, movement patterns, and surveillance feeds. Seo-yeon guided Laila to a particular screen, pointing to a series of markers that pulsed faintly with changing colors. "These are key players," Seo-yeon explained, her tone precise. "Their alliances shift constantly. Observe their behavior, note the subtleties, and predict their moves. This is how power flows. You will need to see it, anticipate it, and learn to influence it without overt action." Laila leaned in, her eyes scanning the feeds. Each movement, each interaction, each subtle gesture became a clue. Her mind raced, connecting dots, forming hypotheses, predicting reactions. Min Seo and Haejin hovered nearby, offering small corrections and affirmations. Jinwoo's gaze never wavered from her, dark and assessing, as if measuring not only her skill but her potential, her capacity for risk, and perhaps, something deeper, her resilience under pressure. Hours passed in a blur of observation, analysis, and strategic reasoning. Laila found herself anticipating threats, suggesting adjustments, and noticing subtle shifts in loyalty and behavior that even the trained aides occasionally missed. Each correct prediction was a thrill, each miscalculation a warning. But by mid-afternoon, she felt the first real stirrings of something unexpected: emotional awareness. Her interactions with Jinwoo, Min Seo, Haejin, and now Seo-yeon had created a web of observation that extended beyond mere strategy. It touched pride, respect, and a subtle, undeniable attraction she could not yet define. A sudden alert shook the command center. A rival faction was making a bold move, attempting to infiltrate an asset in a neighboring district. Orders flew, guards moved with disciplined precision, and Laila's pulse surged. This was no longer a simulation. This was real. Her training, her observations, her instincts, all would be tested. "Focus on patterns," Jinwoo instructed, his voice cutting through the flurry. "Predict before they act. Influence without exposure." Laila's eyes darted between screens, piecing together movements and probabilities. She noticed a discrepancy in the timing of a patrol route, a minor but critical deviation. "They're exploiting the northern access point," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through her. "If we reinforce here and reroute patrols, we can contain them without escalation." Seoyeon's eyes flicked to Laila, a faint smile of approval. "Correct. But notice their approach. They expect reaction. Subtle misdirection is required. You must anticipate their anticipation." Minutes later, the rival operatives attempted their infiltration. Laila's predictions proved accurate. Guards moved into positions she had recommended, subtly redirecting the threat without triggering panic or revealing their hand. Jinwoo observed from the shadows, his expression unreadable, yet the faint nod of acknowledgement that followed her correct intervention sent a thrill of validation through her. She was no longer merely reacting, she was shaping outcomes. Once the situation was under control, Jinwoo stepped forward, his dark eyes locking with hers. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "But this is only the beginning. Your evolution requires both intellect and emotional acuity. Recognize patterns, yes, but also people. Understand motivations, anticipate reactions, and never underestimate influence." Laila felt a flush rise to her cheeks, equal parts pride and fear. The villa had become more than a safe house. It was a crucible, forging her mind, instincts, and awareness into tools of strategy and subtle power. And in the center of that crucible was Jinwoo, a force to be reckoned with, terrifying and magnetic, whose expectations both pushed and defined her. Later, Minseo approached her with a quieter task, a series of communications between allies and informants that needed verification. Laila pored over the messages, noting inconsistencies and subtle cues in language that hinted at shifting loyalties. Each correct interpretation was a small victory, each misread nuance a lesson in humility and precision. As dusk settled over the villa, Seoyeon guided Laila to a balcony overlooking the city. Lights flickered in the distance, the hum of Seoul rising faintly. "This city is alive," Seoyeon said softly. "Every street, every building, every movement has a purpose, a hidden narrative. Learn it, anticipate it, influence it. And remember, in Jinwoo's world, what you observe is only as valuable as what you do with it." Laila exhaled slowly, the weight of the day pressing against her chest. She realized that she had grown, not just in skill, but in awareness. She had survived streets, chases, and kidnappings. She had survived the initial lessons of Jinwoo's villa. Now she was learning strategy, influence, and the subtle power of observation. Jinwoo appeared silently behind her, his presence enveloping her in a tense, charged aura. "You are evolving faster than expected," he said quietly. "But evolution is never without risk. Today was a test of intellect and foresight. Tomorrow will challenge your judgment and courage." Her pulse quickened at the weight of his words. I understand," she replied, though her voice carried a mix of awe, fear, and a growing determination. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence, yet distant enough to maintain the quiet intensity that had become their unspoken dynamic. "Laila," he said softly, almost a whisper, "your transformation is no longer hidden from me. You are no longer just a survivor. You are a participant. And soon, you will be more than that. You will be significant. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and intoxicating. Laila felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and a dangerous awareness of the role she was beginning to play. She was no longer merely reacting to the world around her, she was shaping it, influencing it, and her presence was being recognized by someone whose judgment had once seemed untouchable. As night fell, the villa quiet once more, Laila lay in her room reflecting on the day. Minseo and Hyejin had guided her, Seoyeon had challenged her, and Jinwoo had observed. Each interaction had been a step forward, a test, a lesson. And in the quiet solitude, she realized something profound. She was no longer the girl who had been hunted, terrified, and helpless. She was Laila, a force awakening, a mind sharpening, a presence growing in influence and capability. And somewhere in the depths of her awareness, a dangerous thought took root. She was not merely surviving Jinwoo's world. She was beginning to own it, piece by piece, lesson by lesson, observation by observation. The plan unfolded with precision. The rival operatives were intercepted, redirected, and eventually neutralized without any major confrontation. Laila felt her chest tighten with adrenaline. She had influenced the outcome, and her presence had been essential to the operation's success. Jinwoo observed silently, his gaze dark, measuring, and yet beneath the surface, a faint recognition of her growing capability. Once the threat subsided, Jinwoo approached her, expression unreadable but eyes piercing. "You acted decisively," he said, voice low. "Correct decisions under pressure are rare. You are indispensable." The words reverberated through her. Indispensable, influential, recognized. Laila felt a shiver run through her, a mix of pride, fear, and an unspoken thrill. She was no longer merely reacting. She was shaping events, guiding outcomes, and stepping further into Jinwoo's world, not as a captive, but as a partner in strategy and survival. Seoyeon appeared at her side, a rare smile touching her features. "You handled that brilliantly, but remember, this is only one test. They will escalate if they sense weakness. We must remain vigilant, adaptive, unpredictable." Hours later, the villa quieted, and Laila found herself alone on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. The hum of Seoul was a distant rhythm, but her mind was alive with patterns, strategies, and calculations. She thought of Jinwoo, of Seoyeon, Minseo, Hyejin, and the intricate web of loyalty, power, and danger that had become her new reality. A sudden movement at the balcony door made her turn. Jinwoo stood there, leaning against the frame, dark eyes assessing her with a calm intensity. "You're evolving faster than anticipated," he said softly. "But evolution is never without risk. Today was a demonstration of intellect and foresight. Tomorrow will challenge your courage and emotional acumen." Her pulse quickened. I understand," she replied, her voice steady despite the thrum of anticipation. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from him, yet distant enough to preserve the unspoken intensity. "Laila," he said quietly, "your transformation is becoming visible. You are no longer just surviving. You are participating, and soon you will be significant." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Laila felt a shiver run through her. Fear, exhilaration, and awareness intertwined, creating a dangerous, intoxicating clarity. She was no longer merely a witness to Jinwoo's world. She was shaping it, influencing it, and being recognized for her power, skill, and agency. As night deepened, Seoyeon returned to brief her on intelligence gathered from the city. "New developments," she said, voice urgent. "A third faction is emerging. Independent, unpredictable, and aggressive. Jinwoo will want a complete analysis before any engagement." This is your opportunity to demonstrate strategy and insight beyond reaction. Laila nodded, adrenaline sharpening her focus. She studied the maps, cross-referenced movement patterns, and identified vulnerabilities. Each detail, each calculation, each observation was an opportunity to assert influence, to test herself, and to prove that she was no longer a passive participant in the dangerous world she had been thrust into. By midnight, she had prepared a detailed assessment for Jinwoo. Minseo and Hajin reviewed her recommendations, nodding in quiet acknowledgement. Seoyeon smiled, a rare expression of approval that made Laila's chest swell. Jinwoo entered the command center, scanning the room before his eyes landed on her. "You've exceeded expectations," he said, voice low, deliberate. "You see beyond the obvious, anticipate consequences, and understand the subtleties of influence. Few can manage this. You can." The acknowledgement left her breathless, yet a sense of purpose settled over her. She was no longer merely surviving, she was shaping events, influencing outcomes, and beginning to understand the balance between fear, respect, and strategy. Jinwoo's gaze softened just enough to hint at approval, though the underlying intensity remained. "Rest tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow the stakes rise. You must be prepared, not only for threats but for decisions that will define both your influence and your understanding of the world you now inhabit." Laila left the command center, her mind racing with calculations, scenarios, and strategies. The villa was quiet, but she felt the pulse of activity beneath its walls, a network of people, movements, and secrets that now included her. She had crossed thresholds she hadn't imagined possible, from hunted girl to strategic participant, from fearful observer to influential actor. On her balcony, she looked out over the city again, feeling the quiet thrill of agency. Every street, every building, every movement was part of a living puzzle she now had a hand in solving. And in the dark, the presence of Jinwoo lingered in her awareness, a constant reminder of challenge, guidance, and the unspoken connection that had been growing between them. Somewhere between fear and exhilaration, Laila realized the truth. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning, influencing, evolving, and Jinwoo had taken notice. And in that realization, a dangerous clarity emerged. She was no longer a pawn, a captive, or a mere observer. She was becoming a force, a presence, and someone who could not be ignored. The dawn light barely pierced the city haze as Laila reviewed the latest intelligence. The third faction, unpredictable and aggressive, had shifted positions overnight, exploiting gaps in surveillance that were only visible to a keen eye. Laila's pulse quickened, but this time, fear was tempered by clarity and focus. She was no longer the hunted girl of the past. She was a strategist, calculating risks, predicting moves, and preparing contingencies. Seoyeon joined her at the command center, holding a tablet that displayed detailed movement patterns. "They're probing the eastern corridors of Jinwoo's territory," she said quietly. "They're testing reactions, looking for weak points. If they sense hesitation, they'll escalate immediately." Laila leaned over the data, tracing paths, timing rotations, and identifying choke points. "We need to anticipate their strategy," she said firmly. "Their approach isn't just physical, they're testing perception, loyalty, and response time. If we predict their movements accurately, we can control the engagement without giving them the advantage." Minseo and Heijin appeared beside her, silent but alert. "Are you confident in your analysis?" Minseo asked, his voice low but measured. Laila glanced up, meeting his gaze. "Confidence comes from clarity," she replied, "and clarity comes from seeing beyond the obvious. I see patterns they do not yet recognize." Seoyeon nodded approvingly. "Then we act." By mid-morning, Jinwoo arrived, moving through the villa with the quiet authority that always drew attention. His eyes, dark and calculating, swept over the team before settling on Laila. "Status?" he asked. Laila straightened, gesturing toward the screens. "Third faction probing eastern corridors. They've shifted resources overnight. Patterns indicate they will attempt infiltration at 2 key points. Coordinates I've highlighted here and here." She traced the paths, emphasizing weak points and timing windows. "We can anticipate their move and redirect resources to contain them efficiently." Jinwoo studied her, expression unreadable, then inclined his head slightly. "You're prepared to act independently?" "I am," she said firmly. "I've coordinated with Min Seo and Haijin. Seo-yeon is monitoring communications and reporting anomalies. We're ready to execute containment and diversion strategies immediately." His gaze lingered on her, intense and piercing. "Good," he said finally. "Then show me what you've learned." The villa erupted into coordinated action. Guards moved with precision as Laila directed them, issuing instructions with clarity and authority. Min Seo and Hae-jin executed her strategies flawlessly, while Seo-yeon relayed updates in real time. Laila's mind raced, calculating probabilities, adjusting contingencies, and predicting every possible move of the third faction. Every decision was critical. Every action had consequences. The enemy struck first at the eastern sector, probing defenses. Laila's anticipations proved accurate. Guards intercepted the initial advance, and subtle misdirection caused the operatives to expend resources unnecessarily. Yet a smaller detachment attempted to breach a secondary corridor, testing the team's cohesion and her ability to react. Laila's instincts sharpened. She noted the angle of approach, the likely response of her team, and the timing of reinforcement arrival. "Redirect forces to the secondary corridor," she instructed calmly. "Set up diversion at the eastern perimeter. Min Seo, coordinate containment. Hae-jin, flank support. Seo-yeon, monitor communications and relay updates immediately." The operation unfolded with precision. The third faction's movement was contained, misdirected, and eventually neutralized without major confrontation. Laila felt the sharp thrill of accomplishment, her chest tightening with adrenaline. She had influenced outcomes, guided actions, and asserted her presence in the unfolding strategy. Jinwoo observed silently throughout, a shadowy presence that weighed on the room yet lent her clarity. When the operation ended, he approached, expression unreadable, but eyes dark with assessment. "You acted decisively," he said quietly. "Few can predict movements with such accuracy and respond effectively under pressure. You are indispensable." The acknowledgement left her breathless. Indispensable. Influential. Recognized. Laila's transformation from captive to active strategist was now undeniable. Not just to herself, but to Jinwoo. Seo-yeon, Min Seo, and Hae-jin gathered around, quietly exchanging nods of approval. "This is only the beginning," Seo-yeon said, her voice low. "The third faction will adapt, so must we." Jinwoo's eyes met Laila's, and for a fleeting moment the intensity softened, though it remained sharp. "You've learned quickly," he said. "But this world is never static. Threats evolve, loyalties shift, and influence is a moving target. You must remain vigilant, agile, and decisive." Laila absorbed his words, understanding the weight of responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. She was no longer simply surviving, she was shaping the battlefield, guiding outcomes, and influencing the flow of events. The villa had become her domain, the team her instruments, and the city's undercurrents her challenge. The night deepened, and the villa quieted. Laila retreated to the balcony, watching Seoul flicker with lights below, alive with movement and possibility. Jinwoo appeared silently beside her, leaning against the railing, his presence a calm yet potent force. "You handled today exceptionally," he said softly. "But tomorrow will test more than strategy. It will test judgment, emotional acuity, and your ability to maintain composure when stakes are highest. Her pulse quickened. I understand, she said, voice steady but tinged with anticipation. A subtle smile flickered across his lips, rare and fleeting. Good. That acknowledgement alone can tip the balance. Remember, perception shapes reality. Influence shapes perception, and you have begun to understand both. Laila's gaze lingered on the city below, her mind already racing through scenarios, possibilities, and contingencies. The villa was no longer merely a refuge. It was the center of a web she now helped direct, an intricate network of strategy, loyalty, and calculated power. She felt the sharp thrill of agency, awareness, and influence, knowing that her actions mattered now more than ever. Minutes later, Seoyeon interrupted, her tone urgent yet measured. New intel. Independent operatives are forming alliances with smaller factions. They could strike within hours if unmonitored. Laila nodded, adrenaline sharpening her focus. We need to anticipate every alliance, every movement. Every decision we make now can influence the next phase of conflict. Minseo, Haijin, map contingencies. Seoyeon, maintain communications. I'll monitor patterns and guide strategy in real time. The team dispersed with practiced efficiency, executing Laila's directions with precision. She felt the pulse of control and responsibility coursing through her, a mix of fear, exhilaration, and awareness that sharpened every thought. The city outside was alive with danger and opportunity, and she had become its silent architect, predicting, influencing, and directing from her vantage point in the villa. Hours passed in tense calculation. Alerts pinged, patterns shifted, and Laila adapted without hesitation. She was no longer merely reacting to events. She was orchestrating them, steering outcomes, and asserting influence that extended beyond the villa's walls. As the night wore on, Jinwoo returned to stand beside her, voice low and deliberate. You've changed, he said quietly, and in response, so have I. That is the nature of this world, constant adaptation, constant assessment. But one thing is certain, you are no longer merely observed, you are essential. The word hung in the air, a reminder of her transformation. Laila felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of pride, exhilaration, and the subtle thrill of recognition. Fear had evolved into strategy, observation had become influence, captivity had become agency. And in that moment, standing beside Jinwoo and overlooking the city, Laila understood the truth she had been approaching for weeks. She was no longer just surviving. She was shaping the world around her, influencing outcomes, and asserting herself in ways that were dangerous, potent, and undeniable. The morning arrived heavy with anticipation. Laila reviewed the night's intelligence, her mind sharp and alert. The third faction had shifted tactics, aligning with smaller rogue operatives in an attempt to destabilize Jinwoo's network. It was a coordinated move, subtle yet dangerous, requiring immediate and precise response. Seoyeon joined her at the strategic console, tablet in hand. They're exploiting gaps in communication between territories. If we don't act quickly, the infiltration could spread, she said quietly. Her eyes met Laila's, a mixture of trust and reliance that reinforced the weight of responsibility now resting on Laila's shoulders. Laila leaned over the display, tracing possible infiltration points and noting where her team could anticipate and intercept movement. Minseo and Haijin will need to manage the front line, she said. We'll create decoys to misdirect them while controlling high-value targets. Timing is critical. We can't allow hesitation. Seoyeon nodded. Agreed. Communications will remain open, but subtle. We cannot let them detect our coordination prematurely. The villa's main doors opened and Jinwoo entered, his presence commanding and immediate. His gaze swept the room, resting on Laila. Status, he asked, his voice calm yet carrying authority that demanded focus. Laila straightened, tracing key infiltration points on the map. Third faction is moving through secondary corridors, exploiting small operatives as diversion. We can anticipate their approach and direct responses accordingly. Minseo and Hyejin are ready for engagement. Seoyeon is monitoring communications. I've coordinated contingencies based on probability patterns and anticipated reactions. Jinwoo's dark eyes scanned her, unreadable yet sharp. Prepared to make independent decisions? He asked. I am, she replied firmly. I've coordinated with the team. All contingencies are accounted for. We can control the outcome if we execute precisely. A subtle smile flickered across his face, rare and fleeting. Then lead, he said simply, stepping back. The villa came alive with movement. Guards executed precise instructions as Laila directed, issuing commands calmly but decisively. She observed every shift, predicting threats before they became critical. A group of rogue operatives attempted an early strike at the eastern corridor, only to be misdirected by her pre-positioned decoys. Timing, precision, and awareness guided every move. Minseo intercepted the first wave with calculated efficiency, while Hyejin flanked the secondary approach. Seoyeon relayed real-time updates, her voice steady, her eyes scanning multiple monitors. Laila's mind raced, adjusting strategies and redirecting forces with a blend of calculation and instinct. Each decision influenced outcomes, and the team responded seamlessly under her guidance. Despite the calm efficiency, the third faction escalated the crisis, sending operatives toward the villa's perimeter. Laila noted the subtle patterns in their approach: predictable hesitation, reliance on minor distractions, and overconfidence in the team's inexperience. She issued new instructions with precision, redirecting resources, sealing vulnerable points, and positioning high-value targets under direct protection. Jinwoo moved silently through the villa, his presence a shadowy force that lent clarity without interference. His eyes found Laila's frequently, measuring, assessing, acknowledging competence. She could feel the weight of his observation, a silent challenge tempered by trust, and it sharpened her focus. Hours passed in tense, controlled chaos. Laila adapted continuously, anticipating shifts in the third faction's strategy, intercepting diversions, and guiding her team with subtle authority. The villa remained secure, the infiltrators contained, and the crisis resolved without major breach. Each successful maneuver reinforced her growing confidence and skill. When the dust settled, Jinwoo approached her quietly. "You acted decisively," he said softly, voice low but deliberate. "And your analysis was correct. Few could respond so efficiently under pressure. You are essential." The word struck her again, a sharp thrill of recognition and responsibility. Essential, influential, recognized. Laila felt the full weight of her transformation, from a hunted girl to a strategic force in Jinwoo's world. Seoyeon, Minseo, and Hyejin gathered, nodding subtly, their respect for Laila clear in their measured gestures. "Your predictions were flawless," Seoyeon said quietly. "The team executed perfectly because you guided us." Jinwoo's gaze remained fixed on her. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "The third faction will regroup. Loyalties are fluid, trust is tested, and perception shapes reality more than brute force ever can." Laila absorbed his words, recognizing the continuous challenge ahead. Survival was no longer a simple instinct. It was strategy, influence, and psychological acuity. She was part of a larger web now, her decisions rippling through every layer of Jinwoo's network. Later, she retreated to a quiet room, reviewing every decision, every prediction, and every movement. The villa was calm for now, but the city outside pulsed with hidden dangers. She traced patterns of communication, calculated probabilities, and envisioned possible outcomes for the next phase of conflict. Jinwoo appeared silently beside her, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You've changed," he said quietly. "And I've changed in response. That is the nature of this world. Constant adaptation, constant observation. But one thing is certain. You are no longer merely observed. You are influential." Laila met his gaze, a mixture of pride, fear, and exhilaration running through her. "Influential," she repeated softly, tasting the word. She could feel the subtle power shift in the room, the acknowledgement of her presence as a force, not just a participant. A pause settled between them, heavy with unspoken tension. "Tomorrow," Jinwoo continued, "will test more than skill. It will test judgment, emotional intelligence, and your ability to maintain composure when stakes are highest. Are you ready?" "I am," Laila replied, voice steady though her pulse raced. "I've learned to anticipate, adapt, and influence. I'll continue to do so." He inclined his head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of respect and trust. "Good. Remember, perception shapes reality, and influence shapes perception. You've begun to understand both. That understanding will define the difference between success and failure." The night deepened, and Laila returned to her observation post. Patterns of movement, signals from the third faction, and subtle cues from her own team filled her vision. She could feel Jinwoo's presence even when absent, his observation a guiding force in her calculations. She traced every possibility, predicted outcomes, and prepared contingencies, her mind alive with strategy and anticipation. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. When the city outside finally settled into its nocturnal rhythm, Laila allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Fear had transformed into focus. Survival had become mastery. Captivity had become agency. She had evolved from a hunted girl into a force whose presence, decisions, and influence could shape outcomes in ways previously unimaginable. Minseo and Haijin returned from their rounds, quietly reporting on perimeter security. Seoyeon remained at the communications console, monitoring updates with quiet precision. Jinwoo appeared once more, standing silently beside Laila. "You've proven yourself today," he said, voice low, deliberate. "But remember, influence is always tested. Tomorrow alliances will shift, perception will change, and you must remain vigilant. Are you prepared for that?" Laila met his gaze, pulse steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I am," she said firmly. "I will remain vigilant. I will adapt, anticipate, and influence. That is my role now." He nodded once, subtle and deliberate, a rare acknowledgement of approval. "Good. Then rest briefly. The next challenge will come sooner than you expect, and when it does, you must act without hesitation. Your presence is no longer just recognized. It is essential. That recognition carries responsibility, Laila. Never forget it." She nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. The night stretched on, quiet yet alive with potential threats and opportunities. Laila felt a surge of awareness and power. She had become more than a survivor. She was a strategist, a force, and an essential part of Jinwoo's world. Fear no longer dominated her. Instead, calculation, influence, and agency shaped her every thought and action. As she finally allowed herself to rest, a dangerous clarity settled over her. She was no longer a victim, a captive, or a bystander. She was influential, recognized, essential, and alive. And as the city slept beneath her, Laila understood that her evolution was only beginning. The true test of power, strategy, and perception lay ahead. The city had grown quiet, but the calm was deceptive. Laila moved through the private corridors of Jinwoo's estate with the ease of someone who had learned to anticipate every creak, every shadow, every footstep. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stumbled into his world weeks ago. Every glance, every movement was precise, measured. She carried herself like a strategist, not a captive, and Jinwoo had begun to notice the subtle shifts in her posture, in the way she commanded attention without speaking. "Laila," Jinwoo said softly, appearing from the shadows with his usual quiet authority. "The threat has escalated. The Min faction has grown bolder. They've infiltrated one of our key operations." His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto hers. "We need to act, and I need you with me. Are you ready?" She met his gaze without flinching, pulse steady despite the tension. "I'm ready," she said firmly, her voice carrying both determination and authority. The two moved through the estate in silence, accompanied by their inner circle, Seo-hyun, a loyal strategist with sharp instincts and a pragmatic mind, and Hye-jin, Jinwoo's trusted operations lead, whose loyalty was matched only by her skill with intelligence networks. Both women had been quietly assessing Laila since her arrival, and now, with the imminent confrontation, they regarded her with a mixture of surprise and acknowledgement. She was no longer a newcomer. She was a factor in the unfolding events. The operation was set with meticulous precision. Min faction operatives had been spotted near a warehouse in the outskirts of Seoul, a critical supply point that could tip the balance of power if left unchecked. Laila studied the schematics, memorized every entry and exit, every security detail, and outlined subtle countermeasures to avoid unnecessary casualties while ensuring maximum disruption to the rival faction. Her hands traced lines across the digital map, her mind calculating probabilities, contingencies, and alliances. Jinwoo watched silently, a faint acknowledgement in his eyes. "You've changed," he murmured. "Not just in skill, but in instinct. I trust you with decisions I once reserved for Seo-hyun." Laila's lips pressed into a firm line. Trust. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and she understood the weight of it. "Then let's not waste it," she said. As night fell, they approached the warehouse, the streets quiet, shadows stretching long under the dim streetlights. Laila, Jinwoo, Seo-hyun, and Hye-jin moved like ghosts, silent, efficient, and deliberate. Every step, every gesture was coordinated, every potential threat assessed. Laila's mind raced, cataloging allies, possible betrayals, escape routes, and fallback positions. Inside the warehouse, chaos erupted. Min faction operatives had underestimated Jinwoo's team, and Laila's strategies immediately took effect. She directed Seo-hyun to cover the rear entrance, positioned Hye-jin to intercept communications, and coordinated the team's movements to encircle the rival faction without exposing themselves unnecessarily. A shot rang out, and for a split second, Laila felt the old fear prick at her. But instinct overtook panic. She moved decisively, guiding Jinwoo to safety while redirecting Min faction operatives toward neutralized zones. Each action, each decision, felt like a dance she had rehearsed for weeks. Jinwoo's voice broke through the comms, low and commanding. "Laila, now!" She executed the final move, directing the capture of the faction leader without a single casualty among their team. The operation was swift, precise, and effective. By the time the authorities arrived, coordinated through Hye-jin's intelligence, the Min faction had been dismantled, their influence severely weakened. In the quiet aftermath, the four of them regrouped outside the warehouse, adrenaline still high, hearts racing. Jinwoo approached Laila, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You've become essential," he said quietly, echoing the word that had come to define her presence in his world. Laila met his gaze. No fear, only clarity. "I've survived, I've adapted, and I've earned my place." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, and for the first time, there was a subtle warmth in his eyes. "Not just your place," he said softly, "but mine too." You've changed how I see this world, how I see myself, and how I see you." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement, with possibility, with the recognition of connection forged in fire and strategy. Laila felt the tension shift, not into fear, but into something sharper, more profound. They were equals now, two forces intertwined by circumstance, skill, and the dangerous thrill of survival. As dawn approached, the city waking slowly beneath them, Laila realized the truth she had been avoiding. The world she had feared, the man she had once dreaded, had become the catalyst for her transformation. And in that crucible, she had discovered not only strength, intelligence, and influence, but a connection that could no longer be ignored. And for the first time, she allowed herself a thought both terrifying and exhilarating. She was no longer simply surviving. She was alive, formidable, and capable of challenging even the Heir who had once held her captive. The sun rose over Seoul, casting a golden glow across the city as Laila and Jinwoo returned to the estate. The chaos of the previous night had settled, but the echoes of adrenaline and tension lingered in the air. Laila moved with confidence, no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. She was aware of every glance, every gesture, every subtle shift in the atmosphere, and she navigated it with precision. Jinwoo fell into step beside her, silent at first, then spoke quietly. "You've changed everything. Not just the operations, not just the team, but me." Laila met his gaze, a faint smile curving her lips. "And you've changed me," she replied softly. "I was afraid of this world. Now, I understand it, and myself." For a long moment they walked in silence, the unspoken acknowledgement between them stronger than any words. Seo-hyun and Hye-jin followed at a distance, watching with respect and quiet approval. Laila was no longer a novice, no longer a captive. She was a partner, a strategist, a force recognized by even the most calculating Heir in Seoul. Jinwoo stopped, turning toward her. "I didn't expect this," he admitted, voice low. "Not from you, not from anyone." Laila tilted her head, eyes steady. "Neither did I," she said. "But it seems we've both learned something." A subtle tension lingered, yes, but it was no longer fear. It was acknowledgement, respect, and the dangerous thrill of possibility. In the crucible of survival, strategy, and influence, they had forged a connection that neither could ignore. As the morning light bathed them in warmth, Laila realized the truth. She was no longer defined by fear, by captivity, or by circumstance. She was defined by her courage, her intelligence, and the bond she had built with the man who had once been her captor. Jinwoo's presence beside her was no longer a shadow of threat. It was a recognition of equality, of partnership, and perhaps the first hint of something deeper. She breathed deeply, feeling alive in a way she had never imagined, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope.